The word communism often evokes strong emotions. For many, it conjures images of revolution and the struggle against injustice. Even the word communism can spark heated debates and discussions. To some, it represents an utopian dream without poverty or inequality. Picture a society where everyone has equal access to resources, where the means of production is owned collectively, and everyone shares their fruits of labor. In this vision, there's no room for greed or exploitation, just cooperation and mutual benefit. This is the ideal that communism strives for, a classless society free from exploitation. It aims to create a world where everyone contributes according to their ability and receives according to their need. However, transitioning from a capitalist society to a communist one has been fraught with difficulties. Many governments that claim to be communist faced significant economic and social complications. To understand this complex idea, we need to dive into its origins and the thoughts that have shaped it. By exploring its history and evolution, we'll uncover the reasons of its appeals and the challenges it faces. The story of communism begins with Karl Marx, a German philosopher, political theorist, and economist. Born in Trier, Germany in 1818, he was the eldest of 9 kids. His parents were Jewish, from a long line of rabbis. But as the laws at that time didn't favor Jews in high society, his father, Heinrich Marx, who was a lawyer, converted to Christianity. Karl was baptized at age 6, but later became an atheist. He grew up in a liberal humanist household and witnessed his father joining protests against the monarchy in Prussia, present-day Germany. Young Marx attended Trier High School, where the headmaster, Hugo Wittenbach, was also a humanist. He often employed teachers who shared similar values. In 1832, while Marx was there, the police raided the school and found political liberal literature. This act was considered as a crime against the king. The Prussian government confiscated the books and replaced several teachers. This event left a deep impact on young Marx, solidifying his liberal values. At the University of Berlin, he studied law and philosophy, diving into the works of Hegel, Feuerbach, and other big thinkers. Marx considered becoming a professor, but the government wasn't in favor of classical liberalism. Thus, he was forced to move to Cologne and became a journalist for a radical newspaper. As a journalist, he wrote about his views on politics, religion, and economy. He once famously called religion the opium of the people. Statements such as this attracted government censorship. Many times his articles were banned from publication. In the early 1840s, Marx found interest in political economy and delved into its study. On August 28, 1844, Marx met Friedrich Engels, sparking a lifelong friendship and academic partnership. Friedrich Engels came from a rich family. Growing up, he had witnessed the tough life of workers in 19th century England. He was shocked by the poverty, inequality, and unfair treatment of the working class. Engels dreamt of a world without exploitation and oppression. Marx and Engels began to work together to analyze the economic systems and how they were governed. They spent their lives studying and criticizing the capitalist system. They believed that capitalism, with its inherent class struggles, was deeply flawed. They argued that by getting rid of private property and sharing resources, society could remove the causes of inequality and create a system where everyone had a fair chance to succeed. The Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in 1848. It was the first book to say that capitalism takes advantage of workers. It asks workers to come together, get rid of the capitalist system, and create an equal society free from religion's control with shared ownership of production. How are communist governments established? Communist governments typically emerge from revolutionary movements. These revolutions occur when the citizens are dissatisfied with their existing living conditions and socio-economic circumstances. The leaders of these movements are often inspired by Marxist ideology, which advocates for the abolition of capitalism and the creation of a classless society. Prominent figures such as Vladimir Lenin in Russia, Mao Zedong in China, and Fidel Castro in Cuba spearheaded these revolutions. They mobilized the masses by promising equity and an end of exploitation. Their strong leadership and commitment to their principles garnered substantial support. As the revolution progresses, it often involves significant conflict and violence, including armed confrontations, large-scale protests, and other efforts to dismantle the existing government. The success of these revolutions depends on securing widespread public support and maintaining organizational coherence. Upon the overthrow of the old regime, the revolutionary leaders establish a provisional government. This interim government aims to consolidate power and lay the groundwork for the new communist state. One of their initial actions is the abolition of private property, transitioning to collective ownership of resources. The new government then implements radical reforms to restructure society according to communist principles. These reforms often include land redistribution, nationalization of industries, and the introduction of social welfare programs. The objective is to establish a just society with equal access to resources and opportunities. The process of formation of a communist government is a complicated one. It requires commitment to ideological principles, strategic planning, and effective leadership. The rise of communism. In the 20th century, many communist governments came and went, each leaving its mark. These movements wanted to make society fair by changing the old ways. Starting with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, then Mao Zedong's China in 1949, and Fidel Castro's Cuba in 1959, communism changed many countries. These revolutions promised fairness and freedom, appealing to many who were suffering. In Russia, poor peasants and workers under the Tsar led to the Bolshevik uprising. In China, years of unfair treatment and foreign control led to Mao's revolution. In Cuba, the unfairness under Batista's rule sparked Castro's movement. These revolutions brought big changes in society and the economy. The Soviet Union, inspired by Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, aimed to make life fairer for workers. China, under Mao Zedong, wanted to end the imperial and foreign control. Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, aimed to end corruption and create social fairness. Despite the problems after the Communist Revolution, these countries saw better literacy, healthcare, and industry. The impact of these movements is clear, shaping politics and history profoundly. The fallacy of communism. Communism sounds good in theory, but in practice it has many problems and contradictions. Over the century, communist governments have been in the news for all the wrong reasons. Also, America's war against communism have painted it in a harsh international image. But why did America wage a war against communism? United States of America is a capitalist nation, and if you remember, the Communist Manifesto called for the overthrow of capitalist systems. After World War II, the United States started a massive national campaign against communism and took concrete steps in the past decades to stop the spread of communism, most notably through the Korean and Vietnam Wars, sanctions against Cuba, that eventually led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and America's covert aid to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight against communist Russia. These efforts were devastating and often resulted in significant loss of life on both sides. But why does communism fail? Karl Marx, the creator of communism, introduced a philosophy to address the deep inequalities he saw in capitalist societies. The vision was simple but profound. But while Marx strongly supported the communist revolution, he did not explain what should happen after the revolution is won. Imagine a successful revolution that overthrows a capitalist government. But then, what comes next? Marx didn't provide clear instructions for running a government after the old system is gone. This often creates a power vacuum, a gap in leadership quickly filled by the revolutionary leaders. Leaders like Lenin, Fidel Castro, and Mao Zedong promised to create a society where everyone is equal. But once they gained power, they didn't want to give it up. As a result, these revolutionaries often became the very thing they fought against: leaders who ruled with an iron fist. In Russia, Lenin led the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, ending the monarchy. However, instead of fostering a truly communal society, he established Leninism, a system where the Communist Party controlled everything. In China, Mao Zedong took a similar approach, but created his version of communism called Maoism, which focused on the role of peasants. The pattern of authoritarian rule in these countries after the Communist Revolution often creates a ripple effect in the country's economy and its citizens' well-being, much like symptoms of a disease in a human body. In this video, we will discuss 4 broad symptoms or issues of communist regimes. The first significant issue in communist regimes is the lack of democracy. The leadership often stays in power not through popular support, but through control over the political process. Take Vietnam as an example. The country holds elections, but they are far from democratic. All candidates must be approved by the Communist Party, ensuring that only those loyal to the party can run. And the citizens have little real influence over who governs them. This lack of genuine democratic choice often leads to a stagnant political system where the leaders are not held accountable, results in widespread corruption and abuse of power. The second major issue with communism is its centralized economic system. This means the state controls all production and distribution. This might seem fair, but in reality it doesn't work well. Fidel Castro's strict government control after the revolution led to chronic shortages, inefficiency, and a lack of innovation. Without competition, there's little reason to innovate or be efficient. Additionally, communist regimes sought to provide equal pay to its workers, but this also meant that there was no incentive for more or better quality of work. This resulted in workers becoming complacent, with little motivation to work, hindering the country's production and businesses. As a result, Cuba's economy stagnated, with its people struggling to access basic necessities and relying heavily on external support. Another flaw of central planning is that often leads to misallocation of resources and lack of innovation. For instance, in the Soviet Union, the focus on heavy industry led to neglect of consumer goods. This resulted in long queues for basic necessities and a thriving black market. The lack of market mechanisms meant that there was no feedback loop to correct mistakes. The third major flaw of communism is the suppression of individual freedoms. In many communist states, dissent is not tolerated. Political opposition is often met with imprisonment, torture, or even execution. In Cuba, political dissidents are routinely harassed and imprisoned. The government controls the media, and there is little room for free expression. In Vietnam, bloggers and activists who criticize the government face severe repercussions. The fourth and most important critique of communism is the human cost of communism. Beyond the political theories and economic debates, there's a profound human element to the story of communism. Throughout history, the implementation of communist policies in the pursuit of a classless society has often come at a devastating cost to ordinary people's lives. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's Great Purge saw the execution and imprisonment of millions as the government sought to eliminate any perceived threats to its power. In China, Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward aimed to rapidly transform the country's agrarian economy into an industrial one. However, it resulted in one of the deadliest famines in human history, with an estimated 15 to 45 million people dying from starvation and malnutrition. The Cultural Revolution in China further exacerbated the human toll. Intellectuals, artists, and anyone deemed counter-revolutionary were persecuted, leading to widespread trauma and loss of cultural heritage. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, under Pol Pot's leadership, sought to create an agrarian utopia. This led to the deaths of approximately 1.7 million people, nearly a quarter of the population, through forced labor, starvation, and execution. These tragic events highlight the often overlooked human cost of communism. As we reflect on the history of communism, it's crucial to remember the individuals who paid the ultimate price. Their stories serve as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the need for compassion and justice in any political system. Each of these countries highlights different facets of the broader issues faced by communist regimes. Despite these flaws, it's important to recognize that communism has also brought about some positive changes. In many communist countries, there have been significant improvements in literacy rates and healthcare. The Soviet Union's rapid industrialization during the 1920s and 1930s transformed the country from a primarily agrarian society into a major industrial power. Massive infrastructure projects, such as the construction of dams, factories and railways, laid the foundation for future economic growth. In Cuba, the government under Fidel Castro focused heavily on education and healthcare, achieving high literacy rates and an efficient healthcare system that, despite its economic challenges, could provide universal access to medical services. In China, under Mao Zedong and later Deng Xiaoping, China implemented large-scale land reforms, collectivization, and eventually market-oriented reforms that lifted millions of people out of poverty through economic reforms and set the stage for China's rise as a global economic power. After the war, Vietnam's communist government invested in universal education and healthcare, significantly improving literacy rates and public health outcomes. While the methods employed by communist regimes have often been controversial, these initiatives played a role in economic development and improving social conditions in several countries. I think the big question here is, do these successes outweigh the systemic flaws inherent in communist regimes? While communist governments have achieved some profound successes, economically there are still flaws that need to be analysed and corrected. The lack of a clear post-revolution plan, the rise of authoritarian leaders, the concentration of power, the inefficiencies of a centralized economy, and the lack of incentives for innovation and hard work led to exploitation, corruption, and abuse, undermining the very principles of equality and fairness that communism sought to achieve. Can communism be fixed? Supporters of communism say that the mistakes of old governments don't mean the ideas are wrong. They suggest a system called democratic socialism, which mixes social fairness and economic equality with democratic government and respect for personal freedoms. Democratic socialists want a mixed economy, where important industries are controlled by the government but still allow private businesses to operate responsibly. I think the lesson here is to remember that the journey towards a better society is ongoing. As we reflect on the past, we must strive to learn from the mistakes and successes of different systems. Only then can we hope to build a world that truly embodies the principles of equality, fairness, and justice for all. Is communism the best form of government? Absolutely not. But is there any government that can claim to be without flaws? The ideas of equality, fairness, and a society without classes in communism are very appealing. But the history of communist countries tells us that the promise of a better future often became a nightmare for many, as the drive to achieve ideological purity resulted in massive human rights abuses. Supporters of communism need to balance its high ideals with the realities of power, money, and human behavior. To learn more about communism and the experiences of people who lived in communist regimes, you should definitely read Animal Farm and 1984 by George Orwell. More such books are linked below. Can communism work in the 21st century? Or will it always be an unreachable dream? Only time will tell. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below.